1915. Some of the most desperate struggles in the First World War unfolded amid the peaks of this spectacular Alpine landscape. Beneath the summits occupied by Austrian and Italian troops, a maze of tunnels and caverns was carved out to gain just a few meters of tactical advantage. Mountain soldiers climbed, fought, and died over and under the highest peaks of the Dolomite range. The most famous of them all was Tyrolean mountain guide Sepp Innerkofler. The mystery surrounding his assault on Monte Paterno still haunts this Alpine peak. After Italy signed the secret Treaty of London in 1915 and entered the First World War, the Dolomites became one of the fronts between Italy and Austria. Italian and Austrian mountain troops raced to capture strategic mountain passes. Here, harsh high mountain warfare involved firefights in the trenches and close combat in the labyrinth of tunnels that had been hewn into the rock.
Controlling the peaks and ridges would have allowed anyone to dominate the valleys below. A good battery of artillery, well positioned, could therefore be absolutely decisive on this part of the front.
The names of the natural fortresses would go down in history, associated with the harsh reality of Alpine warfare. Marmolada, Col di Lana, Monte Piana, Monte Paterno, and the Tre Cime. Andy Hawkins and Julia Richardson are archaeologists of the British Durand Group and experts in tunnel warfare. They have come to explore the incredible mountain battlefields that stretch along the Sexton Dolomites, including the trenches and dugouts at the foot of Monte Piana and the tunnel works excavated in Monte Paterno. Andy and Julia enlist the help of a local guide, Paolo Tassi, who will help them trek across the front line of the White War in the Dolomites.
So the Italians were there in a strong position. The Austrians were the ones that needed to get up into that position and take that position.
Take that position was an unbelievable position to control this area.
Situated in northeast Italy above Cortina, Mount Paterno overlooked one of the most beautiful and recognizable mountains in the Alps, the Tre Cime di Lavaredo, three massive freestanding limestone towers in the Sexton Dolomites.
Anyone who studies the Great War comes across extraordinary figures, and one of the most extraordinary figures was Sepp Innerkofler.
Until 1919, these three peaks, known as the Drei Zinnen in German or the Tre Cime di Lavaredo in Italian, were the border between Italy and Austria. On the 24th of May 1915, Italy joined Britain, France and Russia in the most devastating war the world had ever seen. The young nation had fought the Austro-Hungarian Empire repeatedly to regain parts of its territory inhabited by Italian speakers. Trent and Trieste remained in Austrian hands. And now Italy saw its opportunity to gain the cities and overthrow the Germanic empires.
L'intero fronte dolomitico che gravitava dalla Marmolada.
The Italian army saw the whole Dolomite front that went from Marmolada to the Dolomites of Sextant as a way of breaking into the Puster Valley. And that's why the Italian army pushed very hard in that direction.
On that front, on one day it was the Austrians, and then another day it was the Italians. At that time it was the Italians occupying the summit of Monte Paterno, and it was strategically important for both the Austrians and the Italians.
The Tre Cime, or as it was called in war, the Zinnen Plateau, was very important defensively.
because that is where the border passed.
One man, Tyrolean mountaineer Sepp Innerkofler, would become a hero in this high mountain battle.
Sepp Innerkofler, for us mountain guides in the 21st century, remains a model, like all the guides of that era. Still today, we guides accompany tourists up those peaks, following in their very footsteps.
Innerkofler took up arms to fight what he saw as enemy encroachment on his beloved mountain homeland. But he ended up having to fight his Italian neighbors, the very men who once had waved at him from nearby peaks or shared a drink in the mountain hut he had built in the years before war broke out.
A mountain chain, more than dividing, often brings together populations. To survive in an alpine environment, to farm and live, is tough. Mount Paterno you can find approximately here, in a southwesterly direction behind the Langspitze, and a little further, Taublin's Tower. From the Paterno, they could see the valley, and they could control the whole plateau. That's why Paterno was so important.
Christian Innerkofler is the great-grandson of Sepp Innerkofler. Today, he carries on the family's mountain tradition, running the Dolomitenhof, which his legendary great-grandfather founded more than 100 years ago. The Innerkofler family had farmed for generations before Sepp was born in 1865. He learned to climb and shoot from the best, masters in his own family. He would put up at least 50 first ascents in the area, including the first top climb of the central Big Peak pillar. He climbed on the Matterhorn too, but his beloved peak was the Patternkofel, Mount Paterno. During the First World War, what was once a leisure climb became a life-and-death military operation. Before the outbreak of the First World War, along the Dolomites that were the border between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Italy, Tyrolean mountaineer Sepp Innerkofler had gone from humble farmhand to making his fortune as one of the Alpine guides most in demand for taking rich mountaineers up the peaks south of the Puster Valley.
Zuerst war als Knecht bei einem Bauern tätig und dann war als
First, he was a farmhand. Then he worked at a sawmill where he worked nights, so he could go mountaineering during the day. And very soon, it was clear that as a mountain guide, he had a lot of skill. And then over time, he got his guiding license.
sehr große Fähigkeiten hatte und hat dann im Laufe der Zeit eben die Bergsteigerprüfung erworben.
Sepp Innerkofler.
Sepp Innerkofler, a great climber and an even greater guide who had the privilege of opening a number of routes in the Dolomites.
By the end of the 19th century, the golden age of mountaineering for scientific pursuit was turning into an era of competitive sport for the middle class.
Right behind us here is the Locatelli.
Oh, this is it's a nice story in the Rifugio Locatelli because the original name was Traizinenhütte.
Okay.
Rifugio Tracime in Italian. And then it was destroyed by the Italians and renominated in honor of a famous climber called Sepp Innerkofler.
War eine Art Pionier für das Tal, für den Ort Sexten, für den Fremdenverkehr.
He was a pioneer for foreign tourism because he was the first to recognize that the whole valley around Sexten could be a tourist attraction for foreigners.
Ausgangspunkt eben zum Bergsteigen.
After 5 years of guiding, Innerkofler married Maria Stadler, a young Austrian woman, herself an accomplished climber and the first woman to reach the summit of the small peak of Lavaredo. They had 5 children and soon had a booming mountain refuge business.
Mit seinen ersten Einkünften hat dann eben die erste.
With his early clients, he built the first Dreizinenhütte mountain refuge, but it was too small. And then he built the Dolomitenhof in Fischleintal in 1905 and another small bed and breakfast.
Ein Garni, also eine Frühstückspension im Ort draußen.
While most alpine mountaineering had been on glaciers, the Eastern Alps had many vertical rock faces.
unzählige viele Erstbesteigungen gemacht.
He made a number of first ascents. One of the best known was the north face of the small peak of Lavaredo. At the time, there were English, Austrians, Dutch people who were coming to the area, and they all had money, and they all wanted him with them as their guide.
Leute mit Geld oder Adelige, die wollten dann alle mit ihm in die Berge gehen.
He would become a pioneer of vertical rock climbing.
Sepp is remembered for his many first ascents, especially for the first climb of the small peak of Lavaredo, the most common and most difficult route, and for the climb of northwest peak of Monte Paterno.
Many things have changed since Innerkofler made his famous climb.
Back then, ropes were thicker and absorbed a lot of water and were not all elastic. They were rigid. And now we have climbing shoes with a smooth sole and good grip. Once upon a time, they used big climbing shoes that had very little sensitivity with thick soles that were rigid and made of felt. Climbing was unprotected and much more difficult. Very rarely could one fix a screw and pass the rope through a carabiner. Often you used the rock and the natural face, or you could use the shoulder harness, which I'll show you. Try to imagine from this position trying to keep your partner from falling. Today, modern climbing puts safety over adventure. The mental strength of Sepp Innerkofler and the climbers of that era was really formidable.
In 1915, the road that ran along the valley became strategic as it opened the way to Vienna and Innsbruck. If the Italians had broken through this narrow chain of peaks, they would have controlled the supply routes to Trent.
Through the Puster Valley, it was easy to invade the pulsing heart of Austria. Innsbruck was just around the corner.
On the other hand, the Austro-Hungarian High Command were more concerned about the Eastern Front. The main thrust of the Italian armies was towards Gorizia, where their advances threatened to break the Austrian Empire in half. Sepp Innerkofler was a member of the 3rd Company of the Standschützen, the Austrian Alpine militia, based in Sexton.
Als
As Italy declared war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all the able-bodied men in town were sent to the other fronts. In the village, there were just older people, the youth or those who were unfit for war, and Sepp was one of those. That's why he was still in town.
The Standschützen were local mountain guides, porters, herders and foresters who all had the crucial survival skills for operating in high, rugged terrain. They formed flying patrols that were little more than rifle clubs subsidized by the government. But when Italy began making incursions into Austrian territories, the Emperor mobilized 38,000 of these tough local soldiers.
They defended their valleys. They knew how to move in that terrain. They had a real winning aspect. They were excellent marksmen. And of course, not without reason. The people in that area lived off hunting. So, of course, for their own survival, they had to be good marksmen.
Kaiserjäger, Alpine troops from the regular Austro-Hungarian army, as well as a regiment of the German Army Alpine Corps, were also deployed in the area. The 56-year-old guide was a section sergeant of a flying patrol of the top 12 climbers in town.
With the few people who were left in town, mountaineers, the elderly and the young, they organized these flying patrols to be lookouts across all of the peaks of the Sexton Dolomites, so that it gave the impression that all the mountain summits were always occupied. Every day, they climbed up to the top of 2 or 3 different peaks and showed themselves in order to deceive the Italians.
Die Italiener zu täuschen.
On the first day of war, Sepp Innerkofler climbed to the top of the Monte Paterno and observed Austrian artillery rain down shells on Italian troops in the village of Misurina.
The first shells were shot from the highly defended Monte Rudo, even before the ultimatum that Italy had given Austria, and they hit the saddle of Col di Mezzo and the Alpini, who were working on reinforcing the trench works. From there, Captain Mazzini, from the 58th Mountain Battery, responded, moving up to the saddle of Lavaredo on the first day of the war, and shelling and burning the Dreizinnenhütte.
The Italian troops who rushed up the mountain valleys as the Austrians retreated to the peaks were the legendary Alpini. The Alpini moved fast over passes and along crests to occupy the high ground. On the other side, the Austrians were assisted by several battalions of the German Alpine Corps, but they were largely outgunned and outmanned. Sepp Innerkofler knew it was vital now to occupy the peak of the mountain.
Und schon damals hat gesagt zum Befehlshaber, zum österreichischen Befehlshaber.
Even at that point, he had told his Austrian commanders that Mount Paterno should have been occupied because it was strategically very important. But they did not listen to him. They took it in, but then told him to come back down. And 2 days later, the Italians were on the peak. And then the Austrian commanders realized how important it was, and they gave Innerkofler and his flying patrol the task to take it back. He said, "This is practically impossible, but we will try."
Das ist fast unmöglich, aber wir werden es versuchen.
Andy and Julia trek toward the saddle below Paterno. From here, it is clear why these peaks were of such strategic importance. Ahead of them is the Sechstenstein mountain and Toblin Tower. To their right, Monte Paterno. They opt to try the route round the top of the mountain to the Italian-held positions, tunnels that were dug during the 2-year battle that raged around these peaks. Their starting point is the entrance to the Italian gallery. For safety, Andy and Julia harness up for the most dangerous part of their day, a traverse along a narrow path below the peak of Paterno that leads to the next wartime tunnel opening. The snow is high and the drop to the bottom sheer. On the 18th of June, Innerkofler earned a silver medal for maintaining his observation position on Cima Uno after a violent hand-to-hand fight with Italian Alpini. The Italians were advancing and taking control of the surrounding peaks that overlooked the passes and the road to Sexton and the Brenner Pass. It was during this initial standoff that men from both the Italian and Austrian armies silently observed an incredible scene.
There was a reconnaissance troop from the flying patrol that went behind Italian lines. And while there, he killed a chamois buck to bring back home, but it attracted attention. One of their exploration routes was discovered. The Italian troops cut off their return route, so he had to go a different way, and he ended up opening the first route behind a glacier.
He brought the animal down in a dramatic scene of death, tipping off the enemy. Intent on taking back Monte Paterno, the Austrian High Command ordered Innerkofler to lead his 5 best men of the flying patrol in an attack against the stronghold. It was a suicide mission, and he knew it.
The Italians had gone up from the south side of the Paterno. That was much easier, and he had to go over the northwest face, which was a lot more difficult. A plan was put into place, how he was supposed to take it. In the early morning hours, they set out. He told his son, who was 17 years old at the time and was also part of the flying patrol, "Today, you are not coming with us. Today, you stay home because we may not come back." And that's how it was told to me by my grandfather, who had watched it unfold from below.
The attempted climb and battle of Monte Paterno on the 4th of July 1915 would go down as one of the greatest legends and mysteries of Alpine warfare. 4th of July 1915. As the sun rose over the village of Sexton, Sepp Innerkofler was already at the base of the north wall of the Monte Paterno. All was calm and silent as his sons watched his ascent with a small patrol of soldiers. To see the exact route Innerkofler climbed, Paolo, Giulia and Andy climbed toward Paterno from the location of the guide's traditional refuge, the Dreizinnenhütte. It is a spectacular view. Below Innerkofler, a platoon of 30 Austrian Landesschützen and a few military engineers, including Sepp's brother, were prepared to help hold the Monte Paterno once secured. Machine gun and artillery cover was in place. The battle would be witnessed by thousands. The 6 soldiers were all renowned guides in the Sexton Valley. Armed with carbines and hand grenades, they left their barracks near the burned-out Dreizinnenhütte.
To capture a well-occupied peak, it was often necessary to orchestrate a surprise attack and take advantage of everything that nature and the weather offered.
La parete nord, lo spigolo nord.
The north face, the north chimney, like all the north faces in the Alps, gave the rock face a gloomy aspect. The climb up the north chimney of the Paterno has not changed. But you have to imagine that the first mountaineers who went up these faces found very brittle rock. With time, the rock has become harder. The difficulty of the climb remains the same, but the excitement of discovering new routes is long gone.
Ne è rimasta la difficoltà dell'arrampicata. Quella alpinistica, la grande scoperta, ne è venuta meno. Arrivati in prossimità della vetta.
Arriving close to the peak, Sepp Innerkofler untied his rope and alone set out to attack the summit.
Tentò l'assalto alla parete, alla cima.
I believe what my grandfather told me. He told me that the plan was that, under the cover of darkness, they were supposed to climb, and as they neared the peak, he would give the Austrian troops a sign to give cover fire, and then he was supposed to throw grenades over the top and then storm the peak.
The veteran guide climbed, with no technical aids, toward the surprise assault, with artillery cover lending support. According to eyewitness reports, artillery fragments hit Sepp and another climber, but they kept going. What happened when he reached the top is still the subject of heated controversy today. At the summit, Innerkofler threw 3 hand grenades into the Italian trenches, but they didn't explode. Then, in a hail of rocks and artillery and machine gun fire, Sepp Innerkofler was killed. Whether it was by friendly fire, an Italian bullet, or by a rock thrown by one of the legendary Alpini, is still today a matter of debate.
Le versioni contrastanti riportano diverse.
There are different versions about the last moments of Innerkofler's life.
ultimi atti della vita di. La parte sicuramente più
The
tragica.
part that is certainly most tragic of his grand act of heroism is that he lost his life in front of his son.
E che perì davanti agli occhi di suo figlio.
Angelo Loschi, the stretcher bearer, braved Austrian enemy fire and tried to descend down the opal chimney to recover the body of his dead friend. After 3 fatiguing days, the body of Sepp Innerkofler was recovered, and the Alpini dug a niche on the top of Monte Paterno, and with the guide's rope they made a cross and covered his personal objects with flowers, and Sepp remained up there in the arms of the peak of his beloved mountain for 3 years.
Today, his memory is still alive along the vie ferrate that mountaineers continue to climb, following the paths he heroically forged. With Monte Paterno firmly in Italian hands, the next mountains down would become key for access to the strategic Fischlein and Puster valleys. From the site of Sepp Innerkofler's historical refuge, Andy and Julia have a clear view of the 2 positions Italy and Austria would fight for 2 years to control.
Here we are just at the bottom of these two mountains. The mountain on the right,
Yeah,
it's called Torre di Toblin, Toblinnerkopf.
Toblinokov,
Yes.
just here. The
Just
twin,
on
the
the
twin
right.
peaks.
The Twin Peaks, exactly. And this one on the left is called Sasso di Sesto, Sechsterstein.
Sechsterstein.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you imagine during the war, the Italian, they were here, and the Austro-Hungarian, they were.
Okay.
Paolo, Julia and Andy have reached the tunnels at the base of Monte Paterno and head inside to explore their depths. Since the Italian Alpine troops were unable to attack the Puster Valley without much more support than they had, they simply occupied the peak of the Monte Paterno.
Monte Paterno represented the linchpin of the defensive line of the Lavaredo saddle, and this was a very important defensive line that arrived all the way to Forcella Pianicenza and Colle Arena, so as to block the Austrians at the head of their own valleys.
In the weeks that followed, the Tre Cime would become an Italian citadel of cannons, spotlights and machine gun nests. The Austrians dug into defensive positions, with cannon and mortars, and trenches connected by deep tunnels and fields of barbed wire,